I was wondering, Andy, why, in your opinion, are a lot of the businessmen and the politicians in Ireland really trying to ratify this treaty? Why does it serve them to do so?
I've often been asked this question: why do politicians welcome the transfer of powers to Brussels? And I can only explain it like this. At national level, if a minister wants to get something done, he or she must have a majority in the Dáil, or the National Assembly, or the House of Commons, or whatever it is. The minister must have a majority in the Parliament, and implicitly in the country. Move that power to Brussels, and what happens? At Brussels level, the Commission proposed the laws, but they're then made by the Council of Ministers, the 27 ministers around the table, on first name terms with one another. So a minister who at national level has to look over his shoulder to say, have we got a majority in the Dáil? At Brussels, that minister is one of 27 making laws for 500 million people. There's a huge accretion of personal power to the ministers concerned. 27 citizens, or men and women, around in the Council of Ministers, making laws for 500 million people. Aristotle defined an oligarchy as a committee of legislators. This is a classic oligarchy, a committee of lawmakers, irremovable as a group, because you can get at perhaps your own minister, although he or she might be outvoted on the Council of Ministers, but you can't get at the group as a whole. They're irremovable. So I think it's some such processes at work, that ministers and aspiring ministers and opposition benches who want to get into government and be ministers themselves, see their careers, their power, plans, etc., at European level. At European level, they're making laws for 500 million people. It's a big accretion of personal power. As somebody said, it's much nicer to be running Europe than running Slovakia. It particularly appeals to people from small countries. And, something like that. And then there are the European political parties, all those posters, yes posters that are up around the place. It costs about 6 or 7 euros to put them up and take them down. They're paid for mainly by the European political parties, the Socialist Party linked in with the Labour Party, the European People's Party, which is sponsoring the Fine Gael posters. And there's a lot of fuss because Farage and the Europe of Democracy and Independence finds the leaflet. But all the other parties are doing exactly the same thing, financing materials in the Irish referendum. So I think it's some such process that politicians gain. The same politicians that have really got this country into a mess, a golden circle of politicians, bureaucrats and bankers who've got this country into a mess, are the same people that are pushing the Lisbon Treaty. Good for business in the sense that they have more competition, will help to reduce wage rates and all the rest of it, and facilitate the movement of capital to Eastern Europe. And for the politicians, they get more power at the European Union level in making laws, but the national parliaments lose power, and the people who elect those parliaments lose power. And it's a real crisis in democracy all over the whole Europe.
You did mention, Anthony, that people should be aware when they're voting in the polling booth of the exact words which we are amending, that our constitution has been amended by. Okay? Yes. I think that's too late to actually start reading a couple of words when you're about to mark yes or no. And you can actually get, I just said everyone in the audience here, you can actually get the wording that you're going to be voting on in the post office. Every post office has the wording. Go into the post office, get the wording, read it. And I read it and I was shocked to see what our own native politicians are putting before the Irish citizens asking us to do. Because what happens is you're giving complete power to the Lisbon Treaty over that section of our Irish constitution. So get that out of the post office, read it, go 3 or 4 times, get your dictionary, and you won't be voting yes.
It's complex. It's available. This is the 28th Amendment of the Constitution Bill, as our friend said, available in the post offices, libraries and schools. And you can get it free. It's a bit complex because we've got Irish and English languages, and there's a long amendment. The first 3 sentences are the key ones, because the other part of the amendment allows the state to opt in or opt out of that, depending on what the British do. Because the British go ahead and in certain areas of crime and justice, we'll only go ahead if the British do the same in order to safeguard the cross-border movement, etc. But the first 3 sentences are the key sentences, and the second one, the state may ratify the Treaty of Lisbon and be a member of the European Union established by virtue of that treaty. That's the new union. And then the third sentence, which has been said, no provision of this constitution invalidates, makes invalid, laws enacted, acts done, or measures adopted by the state, necessity by the obligation of membership, from having the force of law of the state. Nothing in this constitution shall prevent laws, acts, and measures of the European Union, necessity by the obligation of membership, there must be the treaties, from having the force of law of the state. This clearly gives supremacy to the treaties, which is the new EU constitution, in all areas covered by the treaties. Not in everything, but in all areas covered by the treaties, which are most things, mostly all economic things, and a lot of political and social policy things, and human rights now. They have nothing in the constitution shall prevent those from having the force of law in the state. It's the tragedy of this referendum, in my opinion, that the referendum is not doing its job in telling citizens this. As you said, if they knew it, they'd vote against it. But the referendum is statutorily obliged by the Referendum Act to tell citizens how the Constitution would be affected by the amendment. They're not doing that. They're summarising one or two things about the change of the Commission, the change of the Council of Ministers. But they're not going to the heart of what they're supposed to do. And they're not supposed to pontificate on radio. They're supposed to draw up a statement telling citizens how the Constitution is to be affected. And they sit around this little booklet, which is an absurd, it says nothing about that. It doesn't tell people that the community is being abolished. It doesn't tell people that this is a new union. It doesn't tell people how the new union differs from the existing union. It doesn't tell people that we're all given an additional citizenship, and what that means. It means you've got new rights and duties. What are they? It doesn't do that job. It's an absolute scandal. It's got 4 million people, 4 million euros to waste on that, and it's just doing the government's job for it. That's essentially what's happening. But you'll get it, and it's also on the polling card. The polling card that will come to the post, I've seen a copy, will actually have the text. And so urge people to try and look at the first 3 sentences and tease out, particularly the first 2 or 3 sentences.
I'm just dumbfounded by this. I'd like to know what sort of banana republic this Europe that we're in has turned out to be, because you're saying to us that on one hand, we have voted no, we may end up voting no twice, but I'm not going to ignore it, and you can vote no once and they'll accept it. Now, what sort of a stupid union are we joining now? What's going on? Nobody told us this back in 1974 and all these other, that this is the way we were going to be treated as a state.
Well, an economic union is one thing, an economic cooperation and community, that's what we began. European economic community, then we got the European community, then we got the European Union without being a real union, and now Lisbon makes it a real union without changing the name. It's a great deception, really. What really is most deceptive is the huge constitutional change being made by the Treaty of Lisbon, which is the EU constitution. The constitution is something that constitutes. It constitutes a new union. And that's quite clear from the second sentence. The state will be a member of the European Union established by virtue of this treaty, the Treaty of Lisbon. It's a different union from the present one. Most people haven't a clue about that. And they're not being told by those who should tell them. Or Brian Cowan, last October the 3rd, June the 13th last, when the no votes piled up was against the yes votes on the day of the poll after the first referendum, he said, oh, we must respect the vote. On the very morning of, while the tallies were still being counted, before the vote was over, Barroso was on the phone to Brian Cowan, and Barroso said, oh, the ratification will continue. And I saw with my own eyes at lunchtime on the 13th of June last year, Micheál Martin, Foreign Minister, saying, of course the ratification will continue, of course. That could only have taken place on the basis that the Irish government said to their EU partners, sorry, the bloody people have voted no to this thing, take no, you go ahead with the completing the ratification process, many countries hadn't yet ratified, and we'll rerun the referendum and get a different result. That's what they did. And they were talking about respecting the vote all the time. That's a complete charade from the very first moment.
There's mass treason going on. The media are responsible as well, because they're not telling the people.
Well, there are some critics in the media. There are some people who are critical, but the editorial line of the newspapers is to push this through. It is true, and they haven't a clue. They're making an iron rod for their own backs. I mean, look at the public sector deficit. Look at the pressure that's going to be on the budget. There has been hardly any mention. I'm going to try in the coming week to try and draw attention to it as best I can, or my colleagues. There's been no awareness that it will make it, if Lisbon goes through, it will make it much easier for fines and a draconic sanctions regime to impose on Ireland to get its 12% of GDP public sector deficit down to whatever suits the Germans, the French, and the Brussels Commission, with the threat of fines, etc., unless we do what they wish. And to make it much easier for that process to occur, because the new voting system will apply to the Eurozone countries, just for the Eurozone countries. And the state that's delinquent doesn't have a vote in such circumstances. That's described also in point 1 of those notes that I gave out.